It's fine. We are live. Hi, everybody. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining. We're waiting on a couple people to join us. That would be Alice and Astrid. But as soon as they join, we'll add them into the call. And we've already got on here the amazing Emily Hornberg and Heather Carter. And welcome to the second day of our New Year's author live chats. This is so exciting. Yesterday we had 5 different live chats with different fantasy genres, and all of those recordings are up on the YouTube channel and on Facebook and on my Twitter. And we've got one other one today, so yeah, you can go back and catch all the ones that you missed. But I'm so excited for this one because this is about fairytale retellings, which is so close to my heart, and yet I'm so bad at writing them personally, so I'm so excited to get to actually meet y'all.
Yeah, I'm excited too.
Yeah, me too.
So, for the sake of those who are joining and who don't know who all of us are, because some of our readers are joining and haven't heard of the rest of us before, let's just go around and introduce ourselves. We'll sort of go around clockwise. So, Heather and then Emily, and then I'll go last. And if we've got Alice and Astrid who are able to join, we'll add them in to the introductions too. And then we will answer any questions people have too. So, if you have questions for us, drop them in the comments as we go along. So, take it away, Heather.
Hello, my name is Heather Carter. I am a wife and a mama who lives in Missouri, USA. And the name of the book that I wrote is Of Songs in Salt Water, which is a gender-swapped Little Mermaid. And yeah, I mostly write fantasy and fantasy romance. That's really where my passion lies. I've been writing since I was a little kid. So, exciting things in store. So.
Yes. It's so good to have you here. I remember seeing the cover for your book of the songs. I can't even speak today. And I immediately bought the paperback. Even though I had just found you through a mutual friend, I was like, I have to have it just for the cover. And then as I bought it, I was like, oh, this is a Little Mermaid gender swap retelling. This is amazing. And hi, Miriam. So good to see you on. Miriam says she's excited to be here. So good to have you.
Hi, Miriam.
All right, Emily, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Emily. My pen name is EE Hornburg. So it's my initials and my last name. I am also a fantasy and fantasy romance writer in the Chicagoland area. My book is The Knight's Chosen. It is a retelling of Snow White, but it has a bunch of other hints at other fairy tales sprinkled in there. So you'll kind of see some like Rapunzel vibes. You'll see some Beauty and the Beast vibes. And it's the first in a series. And so the next one is coming out in May, and that's going to be Cinderella, which is really exciting. And yeah, I've also been writing ever since I was a little kid. I love fantasy and I love romance. Yeah, so that's basically me.
It's so exciting. And so while we're waiting for the others too, and before I jump in, I know we met through a mutual friend in the writing community. Something the viewers watching may not be aware of is that we are all indie authors. That means that we self-publish our books or publish our books through small independent presses instead of big traditional presses, which gives us a little more creative control over our content. So what is something, Heather and Emily, that you enjoy most about being indie authors, especially since you're doing retellings, and retellings can be so tricky? You know, we got those expectations to meet.
I do like having a lot of the creative control. Like I'm with a small publishing house. I'm with City Owl Press. Um, And one of the things that's really cool about my publishing house is that it's also owned and run by authors. And so like the people who own the company are authors, all of the editors are also authors. And so we all kind of have a mutual understanding of what we're all going through. And I just like how personal it can be, where I know I can text or email my editor whenever I want. And I have a lot of input in the cover. I have a lot of input in what happens with my book, which I really appreciate that, where I don't have to worry as much about somebody else taking complete control. But at the same time, I also know that I can handle some of the things that I don't know how to do, because I know I'd be a terrible editor. I would be a terrible cover designer. And so it's really awesome that I have that support, but I can still put my input into it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Like, even as an editor, self-editing is so tough because you got page blindness, and that means like your brain autocorrects errors at some point. You just look at it again and again and again, and before you know it, like, leaks becomes the wrong version of leaks with an EA or an EE, because your brain's just like, no, I know what that's supposed to be, and it keeps going. So yeah, where would we be without all the other people to make it happen?
Right.
But Heather, how about you?
What I like about being an indie author is definitely the control and the freedom that you have with telling the story um, in the way that you want to tell it without feeling so confined. Um, like with of Songs in Saltwater, my retelling, um, whenever I published it, I, like Emily said, I had control over the cover, and control over, how the editing and everything went. Even, obviously I used an editor, but, I liked that the end product was something that, came ultimately from my heart. So I was able to put that out in the world and say, hey, this is something that I created, and here's my book, baby.
Yeah.
The labor was hard, but here she is.
That's right. Yeah, it's a lot of work, whether you publish independent or whether you publish traditional. The work is different in different ways, but it's a lot of work, and we wouldn't be here without the amazing readers who are watching and fellow authors who are watching. Like, that's the best part of being indie to me, is connecting with the other people out there when they get a story and they're like, this story resonated with me, this story moved me so much. It's like there's somebody else out there like me, because you're pouring your heart and soul onto the page, and that's fantastic. And I'm dropping, as this goes on, I'm dropping some links in the comments for people with like our Instagrams. When the live's over, if Astrid and Alice aren't able to hop on, I will put their links in the description too, so that you can check out their stuff, because they have so much going on too. 2022 is a busy year. So what do you guys have coming in 2022?
Yeah, so my next book, The Shadows Heir, is going to be out in May. It's a Cinderella retelling. It takes place after the Knight's Chosen, and it's kind of a combination of like your regular fantasy series and your romance series. A lot of romance series will focus on a new couple and new characters with each book. So there is definitely a new couple. There's new main characters that we've met in the first book, but they're the main focus in the second one. Sorry. But where it kind of differs from a regular romance series is that it does continue the same storyline. So you still have to read the books in order. A lot of romances, you can kind of pick up the book anytime in the series, but this one you do have to follow in order. And so there's still going to be this overarching storyline that's happening throughout the series. And so it's been really fun to put all those pieces together to figure out like how to keep the focus on these characters but still keeping going with the overall plot. And it's in a different kingdom, and this book is going to have a map in it that I'm really excited about, and I think it's going to be really fun just to see a totally different side of this world, and it's completely different characters. I don't think readers expected to be able to see in the second one, and so I'm kind of interested to see how people like it and what their response is.
Yeah. So could they be read standalone? If you haven't read the first one, could you read the second one, or do you really need to read the first one first?
I would definitely recommend reading the first one first, because it does have an overarching plot line throughout the whole series. You probably could read the second one as a standalone, but you're not gonna get the context quite as much as you would if you had already read the first book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I get that. It's so hard because you're writing a series, but when you shift characters, sometimes it's like, oh, well, they're in the same universe, but sometimes they're separate stories. So I like that they sort of feed into each other a little bit.
Yeah, I know that there's a couple people who are like, "Oh, I wish that the characters in the first book, like their story could go on more." And I'm like, "Don't worry, you'll see them. Like they're not the main focus, but they're still there. I promise."
So Astrid actually just messaged me that due to some personal things she can't join. So I'm going to drop her Instagram over in the comments for everybody. Hope everything goes okay, Astrid. Sending much love. And so, Heather, what have you got coming in 2022?
My next self-publishing project, I've actually got a couple things on the roster. I don't have definitive dates for them yet, but I have a book called The Third Veil, which is not a fairy tale retelling, that is going to be published through a serial app. And that
Nice.
was the one that I wrote a few years ago that I'm excited to get out into the world. And then that one's a fantasy romance. And it's set in, it starts out in Victorian England, and there's an invasion of what they call a tournament. It looks like a giant clock or an astrolabe, if you know what that is, that invades from the sky. And
Oh, wow.
it turns out it's from another world that she has to go to in order to stop it from freezing the entire Earth. And it's, I know I'm not explaining it very well, but it's a fantasy romance, and there's lots of action and danger, and she basically has to save her mother in order to stop this invasion from happening. So it's got a little bit of a sci-fi element to it. And then the next self-published novel that I'm going to be releasing, I'm shooting for fall. It's actually a paranormal romance, and it's about these two people that wake up in the middle of the woods, and it's called Echoes of Radfield Hall. And they wake up in the middle of the woods with no memory, and they have to go into this huge, decrepit mansion to survive. And at night, the mansion comes alive, and it's Regency era heyday. And they're thrust into these roles as these characters on the night of this ball. And the night repeats every night. So by day, it's a decrepit mansion. They're struggling to survive. At night, it's just this fancy ball, and they're trying to survive, these supernatural forces that are trying to kill them, essentially. So they're trying to solve the mystery before time runs out.
That's amazing.
Yeah, and it's highly romantic and really spooky, and it's different from anything that I've ever done. So
Wow.
I'm excited about it.
So we're sort of shifting genres just a little bit, which is something that I've loved about the lives this week, is people saying, this is still my core genre and I'm branching out into these other things too. It's great. We got a question yesterday that I've just been carrying to every single live because I thought nobody's really ever asked me that before. And it was, what led you to this specific genre? What led you to fairytale retellings as opposed to all those other fantasy genres for the first books you put out?
I guess for me, so Snow White has always been my favorite fairy tale. and my favorite Disney movie ever since I was like a toddler. And I've always written, and so I remember like the very 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 early version of this story was back when I was in high school. I was like 14, and I wanted to write a book, but I didn't know what I wanted to write about. And I was, always hearing that advice of like, well, write what you know. And I was like, well, I don't want to write about my life and what I know. That's really boring. And my sister actually said, she was like, well, you know a lot about Snow White. Why don't you just write a Snow White story? And I was like, oh, that's a good idea. I'll do this. I actually dedicated the book to her. I mean,
Oh,
obviously, like the
Oh,
version I is out now is very, very different than the one I was 14. That's kind of how I got into the fairy tale retellings, was just because it was my favorite and I wanted to write about it.
oh, I love that so much, and kudos to your sister.
Yeah.
My sister is my biggest muse, my second youngest sister, and she reads all of my work in the awful zero drafts and
Aw.
eats Taco Bell late at night in the car with me and listens to me say, I want to do this to these characters. And seriously, I don't think I would even have books if it wasn't for her. So it always makes me feel so special to hear somebody else talk about, who their muse is, who their inspiration is. Um, yeah, that's
That's
great.
so cute. I love
Heather,
that.
how about you? Do you have I'm going to sidetrack before we get back to why you're writing fairy tales. Who's your muse? Do you have a muse?
I don't know that it's a muse as much as the person who actually got me towards publishing and everything actually was my sister.
Oh, yay!
It really was because I hadn't really written in a long time for several personal reasons, and then I finally was able to write. It was actually the third veil, and my sister, she is a published author. She's actually a horror author. uh,
Wow.
I had her read like the first chapter or two, and she's like, because I was thinking of putting it on like a free, just to get away for free, and she's just like, no, this is really good. You have a really strong voice. You need to publish this. So that was the first novel that I had actually initially queried it, um, and I didn't end up, publishing it that way, but I wrote more and more books, and then I came upon Of Songs and Saltwater. I came upon it. Yeah, I wrote Of Songs and Saltwater, and the rest is history. So
It just happens. They just appear.
yeah, she was the one that said, if she hadn't said, you have a strong voice, you need to do something with this, then I wouldn't be writing.
Oh.
So
So did fairy tale retellings just sort of find you, or has something always sort of brought you that way?
it, in a way, it kind of did, but I've always been inspired by fairy tales because that's what I grew up with. Was fairy tales, and especially like the Disney versions and everything. That's what I was really introduced with, and then I did read like my stepmother had like an extremely old book of fairy tales that I read whenever I went to my dad's house, and like the fairy tale of Little Daylight, I read that over and over and over. So I've always had fairy tales in my life, but then with the Songs in Saltwater, like I love the Little Mermaid so much. I'm like, you know what? I've got to do something with this. And so I crafted it from just my love of the Little Mermaid and an homage to that. And I do have another work in progress that is another fairy tale retelling, but it's
Oh.
kind of on the back burner right now. But there is another one that will be coming down eventually.
It takes so much longer to draft
It
than
does.
I think sometimes you think when you read a book, it's like, I've got to read more of this book. When is it coming? And then when you're on the writing seat, it's like, this book has to go out. I need you to flow, inspiration.
Yeah.
Where have you gone? So yeah, super busy year. This year will be my first branch into any sort of fairy tale retelling-ish books, as opposed to the epic fantasy that I put out last year, The Vow That Twisted Fate. Starfire Express is my story that sort of retells certain aspects of certain fairy tales, including some Japanese myths that are close to my heart. But it's about a human girl. She gets on a train and it's full of monsters, and she realizes she got on the wrong train on her holiday, and she gets swept up in the celebration tour because the train's taking the notorious fairy godmother back to the dragon overlords. The dragon overlords are these benevolent dragons who freed the universe from a very tyrannical fairy rule. And so they're bringing back the escaped godmother, and everybody's celebrating. And so she can't, go back. So she's sort of stuck on this train until they drop the godmother off. And so I feel like it's sort of 10th Kingdom meets Hunger Games, because there's a Fae rebellion in there.
So much.
Hunter, the main love interest in the book, he's a wolf, as in the 10th Kingdom wolf, not a werewolf. Yeah. So I'm really excited to sort of dabble a little bit in that. And then later this year, I'm going down the dark fantasy romance route with some vampire elves and demon kings and hybrids. And that book is coming out in the Realm of Darkness set. That's Splitting Dawn. And it actually went up on Amazon yesterday, and there's 40 books in this set, and they listed it for only 99 cents. And I'm going to drop the link in the YouTube thing, but you should grab it while it's 99 cents. Yeah. I'm so excited about it. But yeah, there's all different kinds of things in there. So I'm looking forward to adding some Japanese culture too, with the kappas and the tengu into the story. So busy year for 2022, and then working on some books for my press, including one of Heather's. Starry Ink Press is a newer press, and like you said, Emily, really it's all authors who are also certified in other things. I'm an editor full-time for a living and write on the side, and so Heather has a book that's a labyrinth retelling, sort of, that will be coming out in early 2023, but the pre-orders are going to go up this year, so we're excited to see where that goes. So yeah, a lot of good things coming this year. We've had a lot of people that are on, and I see your heart. Whoever's left us the heart on Facebook, thank you. That's so kind of you. And if you guys have questions for Heather or Emily or for me, just drop them in the comments and we will answer them. Hi, C.H. Smith. C.H. Smith says, that sounds fun. It's going to be a fun year. Oh, goodness. Looking into 2022, as far as reads go, do you guys have any reads you're looking forward to?
That's a good question. I know one of the other authors, Ashley R. King at City Owl Press, she has a couple books coming out this year. I'm excited. One of them is a contemporary romantic comedy. It's in her tennis series. Although now, of course, my mind is totally blanking on the title, but it's coming out in February, and I'm really, really excited because she came out with the first book a couple years ago, and then she came out with a vampire bachelor book back in October, and I know she's continuing with that series. So I know she's got a bunch of stuff coming out soon. And then I'm currently reading The Witch Collector, which came out later this past year, but I know the second book is coming out in 2022, and like even though I just started The Witch Collector, I'm already very excited for the second book.
And I'm just like, I just want to read all the things. I've been in writing mode so much that I really slipped on my reading this last year. And so there are so many books on my TBR list right now, indie books that I have sitting on my shelf that look awesome that I need to read through, like The Lightning Bride.
Oh yeah, DM Sontag's.
Yes, I'm so excited to dig into that one.
She's getting on the live later today, the 1:00 Central Time live.
Oh,
with
yeah.
the writers of Rohan. That team is incredible. Luke Courtney, I discovered last year, he's in that group too. He has a dark fantasy series, Argent Blade, and it blew me away. I'm excited to see what he puts out this year because he's got a couple projects, but so far I don't know if he's got anything scheduled. So I made a list of like 26 brand new indie authors that I've never read anything by before that I'm going to try out this year, and that's going to try to be my for fun reads. But Becca Burge's Needlework is pretty high up on my to be read list this year. I meant to do it last year, but just like you said, writing and publishing and then working just gets away from you before you know it. And C.H. Smith, who actually I think is on the chat, he released a new fantasy book. And why do I not remember the name? If you're still watching, C.H. Smith, drop the name in the chat for us. I'm going to try to find it while we're talking, but I was so excited about it. It just went live for the new year. So as far as the writing and editing process goes for you guys, how long do you think it takes you to write versus how long it takes you to read and revise and read and revise? Like from beginning to end, it probably takes me a little over a year to have a book ready to put out.
Yeah, I'd say that's pretty accurate. I'm still kind of learning my groove and my process when it comes to that. Because I think if I push myself, I could go a little bit faster. But just, having like another 9 to 5 job and like life and stuff like that. But I would say from beginning to end, from like drafting to the final version, I would say about a year.
I really only have pretty much my debut book to go as far as like between the writing and the release date. I've written several books, but that's the only one that I've like actually really published. I looked at my Facebook memories today, and it said, "Oh, my merman novel. I'm about 4,000 words into it." I published the merman novel in June of last year.
Wow.
It was
That's impressive.
I flew through it. That's not typical for me to fly through it in like a month, like write it in a month.
Wow.
And I had alpha readers on it and stuff though, and then I turned around and dove through revisions and then got the editor lined up, and it was pretty snappy, but it was really stressful. So I would say now I give myself a little bit more time.
Yeah. Yeah.
On average, it really takes me like a few months to write a book. That was kind of an anomaly. So it takes me, a few months to write a book, and then I'll let it rest for a little while, and then go back to revision. So I'm usually writing a book, let it rest, start on another book, and kind of leapfrog it and go back into revisions.
Cycling.
Yes. Because otherwise,
I took for granted how with my debut with The Vow That Twisted Fate, how nice it was to literally only work on one book. And
Yeah.
me being a newbie author, like I'd done the editing side for years, but doing the author side, I was like, I should have been using the 4 to 5 months of editing when it was out with the developmental editor and out with the copy editor to write another book, right? But no, I was just like, how do I spend this time? I'm agonizingly waiting on Instagram and on Facebook and reading, and now I'm like, I should have been writing that whole time. So from now on, it's like the book's going to go to the editor, and then I'm going to write some more, and then that book's going to go to the editor, and then I'll work on the other one.
Yeah, that's something I want to try and work on more too. Like, I always have that like goal in mind, but I'm like, okay, like once it's the editor, then I can get started on another book. But then like my mind is still like in the old book, and so I'm learning how to transition and not keep my mind on something that I'm not even working on at the moment, because I want to get into that sort of habit like you guys, where I can be working on something new as often as I can, so I can get the more books out there.
Yeah. The reality of it is, being indie authors, I'm going to speak broadly. Most of us have real life jobs. And when I was doing all that stuff with Val last year, I was working 2 full-time jobs. I was trying to transition from editing as a hobby to editing as my full-time job, because before I had just done editing on the side. It's like, oh, I've got my day job, which is customer service. I'd spent like 7+ years in customer service, and then I'd edit for people on the weekends, edit for people on the evenings, and the more it picked up, the more I took, and to transition to that, I ended up having to do like 40 hours of one and 40 hours of the other, and then work down so we could still like pay our bills and stuff when I quit like customer service job. And so it can be tough to find time. You know, you're putting in 40 hours a week. Authors who are traditionally published are sometimes are lucky enough to get to just work for a living, but that's not always the reality when you're indie. So it just, we have to give ourselves grace. Be kind to ourselves.
Absolutely.
And hopefully, you know, one day with all the support of the amazing readers on the call, maybe we'll be full-time authors too. But I don't know. I found that I really do love editing for a living and writing for a passion. I don't know how I'd feel about having to turn out stuff by a deadline, or else it might kill my inspiration. But Chris's book, C.H. Smith's book, is Nothing More Than Zero, and that was my cat. So I just dropped it in there too. Congratulations on getting that out. His first book, The Princess Knight, that was sort of fantasy, made me ugly cry like a baby last year. Aww. And it started out so unassuming, and I was like, oh, well, this is nice, but I've read the beginning of the story a million times, and because I edit and I read so much, I don't really cry a lot anymore. There's not a lot that surprises me in books, and that makes me sound sort of cold, but it takes a lot to get to me. And I just sat and I had to take my glasses off and just wept for like half an hour. And my husband's like, are you okay? What? Did somebody die? I was like, yes, my heart died reading The Princess Knight. But anyway, so this is a great year. There's so many good books. And if you're watching and you're like, wow, a year is a long time to wait, that's why we're doing these lives. You can find other books to read from other amazing indie authors while you're waiting on our next books. And I know Heather and Emily can probably say, people are like, when is the next book coming? When are you going to put it out? And mine's the same way. People are like, what's going on with Starfire Express? And I'm just like, I'm so sorry. But definitely check out Emily's Instagram, Heather's Instagram, and Alice and Astrid's too. If you're big into Fairytale Retellings, you're sure to find some great reads for 2022 in there. And if you're looking for more, the Riders of Rohan, which is where DM Sontag will be showing up today, are going to go live with me in about an hour and a half here on YouTube and Facebook and Twitter. So you can hit the subscribe button and the bell if you're on YouTube, and it'll give you a notification when we go live. And again, all the past recordings are on YouTube from yesterday. We've had, by the time this is all said and done, 7 lives and over 20 authors.
Wow.
That's awesome.
That are all indie. So it's very exciting. And thank y'all so much for joining in the middle of a Sunday morning.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks.
This is so exciting. I wish you all the best in 2022. We need to do this again sometime and see how everything's going.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Take care.
Thanks.
Bye.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.